The Comet Diner was quiet this morning, bathed in the soft, golden light that old soldiers like Silas, 85, adored. He sat in his usual corner booth, his faded gray flannel shirt a relic of a bygone era, his heavy boots steady on the tiled floor. At 85, he retained the extraordinary composure of a Korean War veteran, a man who had learned to keep his spirit intact when everything else fell apart. Exactly at 8:15 a.m., as always, his cup of hot black coffee was placed before him. Silas closed his eyes, savoring the aroma. This was his small sanctuary, where the waitress Marcia always smiled, and where he was respectfully called Mr. Silas. But that peace was instantly shattered. At the counter, a broad-shouldered young man named Vance was loudly yelling at Marcia about his bill, demanding compensation for poor service. His voice was loud and rude. Vance shoved Marcia's shoulder, sending a tray of sugar packets crashing to the floor. The incident should have ended there, but Silas spoke up. "That's enough, young man," Silas's voice rang out, slow and steady, carrying an undeniable authority. "The lady is just doing her job. Pay your bill and leave." It was this intervention, rather than a mere glance, that pricked the thug's absolute arrogance. Vance spun around, his eyes narrowing with rage, glaring at Silas, a man dressed only in an old flannel shirt. "Who the hell are you to order me around, old man?" Vance bellowed. He advanced, not toward the door, but toward Silas's booth. He moved too fast for anyone to stop him. Smack! The sharp crack echoed through the diner like a gunshot. The coffee cup on Silas's table wobbled. Silas did not fall. He simply raised his scarred, frail hand to his cheek, where a red bruise bloomed quickly. His eyes remained open, but now they held not fear, but sheer agony. The pain of realizing the futility of every sacrifice he had made. Vance smirked, turning back to his friend, as if he had just stepped on an insect. Customers quickly looked down at their plates. They were afraid, but their silence was worse than the blow. Silas remained seated, heavy, his body suddenly feeling too old and tired. His heart ached from the pain of utter loneliness. Time passed, heavy and drawn out. Silas felt as though a century had gone by. He stared into his cup, his mind drifting back to the decade-long estrangement from his son, Jackson. 10 years ago, they had fought over a leather jacket. Silas wanted Jackson to join the military. Jackson wanted the freedom of the road. Silas's last words were, "You chose a gang over your own family." They hadn't spoken since. This morning, Silas had mustered the courage to call Jackson. "I'll be at the diner at 9. You can come, if you want to." This was meant to be the final chance at reconciliation. And just then, the bell above the Comet Diner's door jingled. 4 men walked in, black leather vests, tattoos winding like ivy, and an aura of cold, dominant authority. They were Jackson's brothers. And in the center, taller and tougher than the rest, walked Jackson, Jax. Jackson didn't need to ask. He didn't need to be told. He had come here to mend a rift, and now he saw a fresh wound, the wound on his father's face. His gaze swept the room, ignoring everything else, until it settled squarely on his father's cheek. The bright red bruise was a personal, unacceptable insult. The 4 bikers stood in silence, but their stillness carried a heavier threat than any engine roar. Jackson began to walk. Slow, deliberate. Every heavy boot step seemed to measure the distance between 2 worlds, the old man's world and his own. Vance sneered, trying to sound dismissive. He was completely unaware he had just crashed a fateful reunion. The old man called his crew for protection, huh? You need these thugs to fight your battles. Jackson reached the corner booth. He pulled out the chair opposite his father and sat down with a terrifying calmness. He didn't look at Vance. He only looked at his father, Silas. Jackson took his scarred, tattooed hand and slowly placed it over Silas's trembling one. In that instant, 10 years of separation melted away. It was a silent vow. I chose this life, but I never forgot who I am. Silas felt a surge of warmth pass from his son's rough hand to his own. The bruise still stung, but his heart felt inexplicably lighter. Vance laughed, but his voice was strained. "So, what are you going to do? You think your old man is some kind of big deal?" Vance decided to escalate the threat to save face. He walked over to the counter, pretending to make a phone call, but his eyes never left Jackson. He pulled out a small switchblade, running his finger along the edge, just enough for everyone to see. "This whole damn diner," Vance said loudly, his voice heavy with menace, "is going to have problems. I'll make sure everything here gets wrecked, starting with this little waitress. If any of you bikers open your mouths." He turned to Marcia, flashing a chilling smile. At this point, not just Silas, but Marcia was terrified. Jackson slowly turned his head. His voice was low, resolute, every syllable a cold bullet aimed straight at Vance's arrogance. "The punk you just laid a hand on," Jackson said, "is my father. He is a man who gave his youth under the barrel of a gun so you could have the right to stand here and bark like a dog. He is an 85-year-old veteran." Then Jackson paused, a cryptic smile forming on his lips. He calmly pulled out a silver business card, not of his club, but of a notorious loan shark organization operating near the docks. He placed it on the table, oriented toward Vance. Jackson leaned down lower, his voice just loud enough for Vance to hear Vance. "You just said you'd wreck this diner. I prefer simpler transactions. Your company, Vance Vending, owes the Port Authority a large sum, 6 figures, and the interest grows every hour. As of right now, that debt is mine. I know exactly who you owe, and how much. You hit the man I came here to save. Respect is the first debt you will pay, and this debt will cost you everything. Right now, you will apologize to my father, pay Martia's bill double, and get the hell out before I make a phone call." The power of those words was far greater than any punch. It wasn't a threat of brute force, but absolute control over Vance's entire future. Vance was no longer a thug. He was a cornered debtor. His smirk instantly evaporated. He mumbled an apology, paid Marcia's bill twice over, and fled the diner in panicked disgrace. Justice was served. Jackson turned back to his father. Tenderness replaced the brutality on his face. Silas looked up at his son, his aged eyes glistening as if he had finally found his guiding star after years of storm. "I fought battles for the country, Jax, but the battle to keep my son close, that was the hardest one, and now it's finally won." Jackson didn't reply, but his hand, rough and tattooed, squeezed his father's frail one. In that moment, the bruise on Silas's cheek was no longer a mark of cruelty, but a scar of loyalty, the price they paid to find each other again. Marcia smiled, her first genuine smile that morning. She brought fresh coffee, knowing the diner was no longer just a place for breakfast. It had become a sanctuary, where the love between a father and son had proven its might against any fist or law. Silas lived out the rest of his days not just with the dignity of a veteran, but with the perfect contentment of a father who found his son, not in the shining path of a role model, but in the loyal shadow of a biker leader. If you were Jackson, what would matter more in that moment, your loyalty to the club or your love for your father? Do you believe that broken family relationships, fractured by prejudice, can be fixed by a single act of courage? Like and share. Share this story to remind everyone that family loyalty is always the greatest strength. Subscribe to Kindness Stories to receive more stories of healing and compassion from the most unexpected places.